I have spent my life treating those who cannot speak for themselves. Since childhood, I knew I wanted to become a veterinarian, dedicated to healing animals in moments of crisis. Over the years, I honed my skills in emergency animal surgery, traveling across the country to save injured wildlife or household pets in dire need. My profession, filled with heartbreak and hope, gave me a profound respect for life's fragile beauty. At last, after years of constant movement, I decided it was time to settle down. I yearned for a quieter place to call home, ideally a friendly neighborhood where I could continue my veterinary work and, perhaps, establish a small clinic dedicated to emergency treatments for pets. Fate led me to Elkwood Heights, a seemingly idyllic suburban community boasting tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, and a vibrant sense of family life. I never imagined that behind its pristine fences and manicured flower beds lurked an iron-fisted homeowners association. And at the top of that HOA, one woman reigned supreme, HOA Karen Beldrake. They called her Karen, and she wore that nickname like both a badge of honor and a threat. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a perpetually stern face, perfectly coiffed hair, and an endless supply of crisp pastel blazers. She observed the community with a hawk's vigilance, ready to swoop in on the slightest infraction. If a person left garbage cans out a minute too long, she fined them. If a mailbox was the wrong shade of green, she summoned the residents to an immediate hearing. Under her leadership, the HOA turned small oversights into large-scale drama. People complied because they were tired of fighting. I had encountered my share of difficult personalities over the years, but Karen was a breed apart. Little did I know, her overreach would stretch far beyond trivial matters like lawn height or fence colors. In time, she would sabotage a life-saving veterinary ambulance service for reasons so petty and heartless that she ignited a national outcry, especially once she discovered I was no ordinary veterinarian, but someone with a global reputation for saving animals in emergency situations. This is the story of how Karen tried to shut down compassion for beloved pets, and how her cruelty ultimately cost her everything. I pulled into Elkwood Heights on a breezy October morning, driving my SUV stuffed with cardboard boxes, some furniture, and my trusty portable veterinary kit. Two large moving trucks trailed behind. Autumn leaves danced along the winding streets. Each house seemed almost identical. Neat two-story homes with pastel siding, trimmed hedges, and symmetrical front gardens. A stone gate at the community's entrance bore a gleaming bronze plaque that read Elkwood Heights, a premier living experience. The real estate agent had promised the neighborhood was cozy, secure, and pet-friendly, which appealed to me. I envisioned families out walking dogs, children chasing cats in the yard, or older couples caring for cherished bunnies. It seemed perfect at first glance. As soon as I stepped out of my vehicle in front of the house I had purchased, a modest colonial-style home with a wraparound porch, my phone buzzed. It was the moving company driver, confirming the final address. I was busy directing them to back the trucks into the driveway when, suddenly, a sleek black Audi rolled up. Out stepped a woman with a pinched expression, her short blonde hair styled impeccably, wearing a tailored mauve blazer and matching heels. She clutched a thick binder labeled Elkwood Heights HOA. I had no doubt this was the fabled Karen. In a clipped tone, she introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Margot Beldrake. Most here call me Karen. I'm the president of the HOA. You must be Dr. Waters, our new resident." I smiled, trying to be cordial. "Indeed, I'm Dr. Veronica Waters. Pleasure to meet you." She looked me over, then glanced disapprovingly at the heavy trucks. "I do hope your movers will finish by 7 p.m. We have strict rules about noise levels. And keep in mind that no commercial vehicles can remain overnight. We also have guidelines on color palettes for window shutters." Her manner felt more confrontational than welcoming. "Yes, we'll be finished well before 7 p.m., I assured her. "My shutters are already an HOA-approved color, according to the listing, so I think we're fine." Karen nodded briskly. "Good. I'll send you a digital copy of our 67-page rulebook. We expect full compliance." With that, she stepped back into her Audi and drove off. I stood there, half amused, half uneasy. The real estate agent hadn't mentioned that the HOA was this stringent, but I tried to remain optimistic. After all, I had big dreams, establishing a small, specialized veterinary clinic in my home's converted garage to serve local pets in emergencies. I hoped the HOA wouldn't object, though I suspected I'd need their approval for anything not specifically residential. Over the next few weeks, I settled into the new house. I chose a spare bedroom as my home office, stocked with reference books about veterinary surgery, while the attached garage was indeed roomy enough to become a modest treatment area once I got the necessary permits. Meanwhile, I quickly realized that I wasn't the only one with concerns about the HOA. Some neighbors warned me, discreetly, of Karen's fierce reputation. One older gentleman, Mr. Davison, confided that Karen had once tried to ban therapy dogs in the neighborhood on the grounds that they're no different from other dogs, so they must adhere to size limits. A mother of two, Renee Harris, quietly complained that Karen objected to the family's new puppy barking during midday, threatening fines unless they muzzled it or found alternative arrangements. I also learned about the monthly HOA meetings, formal affairs held at the neighborhood clubhouse, where Karen and her board would lecture residents about compliance and hear out, usually dismiss, any new requests. I decided to attend, hoping to introduce myself, mention my background, and see if I could gain permission to operate a small after-hours veterinary clinic from my property. If I approached it politely, perhaps I could get their blessing. However, I also picked up on a strange undercurrent. Stories about an incident the previous year when a neighbor tried to run a small cat rescue from their home. Karen had led a campaign to shut it down, calling it unsanitary and disruptive. She seemed to have little patience for any cause that didn't align with her notion of a pristine, uniform community. I wondered how she might react to my upcoming proposal. One Wednesday evening, I arrived at the clubhouse for the monthly HOA meeting. The venue was surprisingly elegant, plush chairs arranged around a mahogany table, with a podium at the front. Karen sat at the head, flanked by two other board members who looked more like hostages than allies. A small audience of around 20 residents murmured quietly, glancing nervously toward the front. Karen called the meeting to order. "We'll begin by addressing outstanding fines for noncompliance," she announced, scanning the room with an icy stare. "Mr. Avila, it seems you left your recyclables curbside past midnight last Wednesday. That's a $50 penalty. Ms. Cartwright, your front lawn still has those wind chimes exceeding 24 inches in length. $25 daily fine. Please remove them immediately." The atmosphere felt oppressive. Neighbors bowed their heads. Some sighed. Karen took a noticeable satisfaction in detailing each violation. Eventually, she opened the floor for new business. I stood and introduced myself. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Veronica Waters, a veterinarian specializing in animal emergency surgery. I'm new here and would like to discuss the possibility of opening a small home-based veterinary facility. Nothing large, just an after-hours emergency treatment room in my garage for local pets who might be in critical condition when regular clinics are closed." A couple of residents brightened at the idea. One mother whispered that it sounded helpful, given how the nearest 24-hour clinic was nearly half an hour away. However, Karen's brow furrowed. She asked pointedly, "Do you have a formal business license for this? And how would you ensure it doesn't create noise, odor, or traffic?" I explained that I was fully certified, had handled emergency cases for years, and would follow strict sanitation and noise abatement protocols. Any overnight or extended treatment would be referred to larger veterinary hospitals. My facility would be for immediate, life-saving care. Karen's lips pursed. That might still violate our bylaws on commercial usage. I recall a clause prohibiting any business that generates noise or disrupts the character of the neighborhood. "We need to see your full proposal in writing." I nodded calmly. "I'll provide all documentation. I just wanted to gauge interest tonight." Karen said, "The board will review and respond within 60 days. She turned to the next agenda item without further discussion. I sat down, noticing sympathetic looks from some neighbors. Several quietly offered support, but I sensed Karen would block me if she could. The question was, why would she be so opposed to a life-saving service for animals? Could it be the same reason she'd opposed that cat rescue? She just didn't want anything messy or unpredictable tarnishing her tidy community. My official clinic plan might still be in limbo, but I was already recognized as a veterinarian by word of mouth. So one rainy night, I got a frantic knock at my door. It was Renee Harris, tears streaming down her face, holding her Cocker Spaniel puppy, Milo, who was choking and couldn't breathe. She'd rushed here hoping I could help. I sprang into action, guiding her into the garage where I had the basics. an exam table, oxygen, and small intubation equipment. Milo had a lodged piece of chew toy blocking his airway. With practiced hands, I cleared the obstruction and administered oxygen. Within minutes, his breathing stabilized. Renee sobbed with relief, hugging her dog as I gave instructions for rest and follow-up at a full-scale veterinary hospital. While I was checking Milo's vitals, I heard a car engine outside. Glancing through the slightly open garage door, I saw Karen's black Audi parked on the street, headlights glaring at my house. She seemed to be watching. After a moment, the car pulled away into the night. The next morning, I found a typed letter in my mailbox from the HOA. A warning that unauthorized use of a residential garage for medical procedures violated local ordinances and HOA rules. The letter threatened fines if it continued. I was outraged. Someone's beloved puppy nearly died, yet Karen's focus was on punishing the rescue effort. This was a chilling preview of the hostility to come. The city where Elkwood Heights was located had a small but dedicated pet emergency response unit, essentially an ambulance service that specialized in transporting critically ill or injured animals to local vet hospitals. They functioned similarly to human ambulances, equipped with oxygen cages, stretchers, and basic medical supplies. I'd collaborated with them occasionally in the past. They were a lifeline for families lacking the means or time to drive their suffering pets. I reached out to the unit's coordinator, Dr. Tara Nguyen, who told me they'd love to have a small satellite station near Elkwood Heights, given the distance from the main hospital. If I could secure space on my property, or even a designated spot in the neighborhood, for the ambulance to wait during nights, it could drastically cut response times for pet emergencies. We discussed how the noise from the ambulance's siren could be minimized. Often it wasn't even used unless in dire circumstances. And we'd ensure compliance with local noise laws. Excited by this idea, I drafted a proposal. The ambulance could park overnight in my driveway, or perhaps a common area, with no sirens unless absolutely necessary. It seemed like a win for the community. Swift response could save many animals from tragedy. In a place that prided itself on being family-friendly, I assumed neighbors would appreciate the compassion. But, of course, the main obstacle was the iron gate known as Karen. Days later, I sent my proposal to the HOA board via email, detailing the ambulance arrangement. Within 24 hours, I received a terse reply from Karen. From Elkwood Heights HOA at official.com. Subject: Pet ambulance proposal. Dr. Waters. The board has reviewed your request to allow a specialized pet ambulance service to station itself within Elkwood Heights. Unfortunately, we must deny this request. Our community bylaws clearly prohibit the parking of any commercial or emergency vehicles in residential drives or common areas. Furthermore, the presence of such a service may cause alarm and disrupt the tranquility of Elkwood Heights. Please refrain from implementing this plan. If any unauthorized vehicles or activities are observed, the HOA will take immediate corrective action. Sincerely, M. Karen Beldrake, President, Elkwood Heights HOA. Her language: cause alarm, disrupt tranquility, stung. In truth, an animal ambulance was no more disruptive than a typical delivery truck. And in life-and-death situations, it was crucial. I tried to appeal to reason, but Karen refused. She even implied in subsequent emails that she could raise legal challenges, citing zoning restrictions and commercial bans. Simultaneously, I discovered that my official request to convert my garage into a part-time emergency clinic had been tabled indefinitely by the board. No explanation given. The message was loud and clear. Karen wanted no trace of medical care for animals in her pristine domain. I was torn between abiding by the rules and saving lives. My passion for animal welfare wouldn't let me back down. If a dog was hit by a car late at night, must it really travel half an hour away to the main hospital, possibly dying en route, just so Karen wouldn't be bothered? The moral answer was obvious, but the HOA's power was formidable. I had to find a way around this. Word spread beyond our immediate neighborhood that Elkwood Heights was blocking emergency pet ambulance services. Local vet clinics, outraged, posted about it on social media. Animal lovers vented anger online, condemning the HOA for inhumane policies. Soon, local news channels picked up the story, labeling it the neighborhood that banned pet ambulances. They asked me for interviews. Initially, I hesitated. Publicly confronting Karen might worsen tensions, but the more I thought about helpless animals denied urgent care, the more I realized we had to shine a light on this madness. So I gave a measured statement on the local news, explaining that my colleagues and I only wanted to station a small, quiet vehicle to assist neighbors' pets. I emphasized that we'd comply with noise regulations. In the grand scheme, it was about protecting living creatures, not violating aesthetics. When the segment aired, Karen fired back. She posted a lengthy notice on the HOA's website, accusing me of fear-mongering and seeking personal gain under the guise of compassion. She wrote, "Elkwood Heights is a peaceful community. We value well-kept lawns, uniform fences, and the quiet enjoyment of property. An on-site animal ambulance is unnecessary and intrusive." Her condemnation fanned the flames of public outrage. Animal advocacy groups began bombarding the HOA with calls and emails. A few protesters showed up at the neighborhood entrance, carrying signs that read, "Pets deserve emergency care," and "Stop the cruel HOA ban." Karen was furious. She escalated her rhetoric, warning that outsiders were trespassing and harassing residents. Behind the scenes, some of my neighbors quietly thanked me. They appreciated that someone was finally standing up to Karen. But others feared retribution from the HOA, fines, harassment, or worse. Tension mounted like storm clouds on the horizon. One evening, returning from a shift at the city's main veterinary yard, I found a note taped to my door. It bore the Elkwood Heights HOA letterhead, but the message was scrawled in ink. "Dr. Waters, you are in direct violation of our bylaws by continuing to promote unauthorized veterinary activities. If you do not cease immediately, we will have no choice but to take legal action and file for a lien against your property. Keep Elkwood Heights the tranquil neighborhood it was meant to be." Karen. I stared at the note, my anger mixing with disbelief. A lien against my property? Because I wanted to help save pets' lives? She was going for the nuclear option. The law was complicated. HOAs sometimes can indeed place liens for unpaid fines. If they manipulated the rules to rack up enough penalties, they might try to force me out financially. Worse yet, the next day, I discovered that my online reviews as a veterinarian were suddenly flooded with negative, slanderous posts from anonymous accounts. Comments claimed I was inexperienced, reckless, and that my clinic gave their pets infections. None of it was true. I suspected it was a coordinated smear campaign, likely orchestrated by Karen or her associates to tarnish my professional reputation. Still, I pressed on, continuing to help neighbors' pets informally whenever I could. But with Karen's hostility intensifying, I began to wonder if I needed to involve a lawyer. Or perhaps I had to go bigger, leverage my broader connections in the veterinary world to ensure that Elkwood Heights' stance on shutting down ambulance services faced serious consequences. I vividly remember the night that sealed Karen's fate. It was around 2 a.m. when I received a frantic text from a young neighbor, Marcus, whose beloved cat, Luna, had suddenly collapsed, struggling to breathe. Marcus didn't have a reliable car. He usually biked to work. He was desperate. The main emergency vet hospital was over 30 minutes away, and he feared Luna wouldn't make it. I told him to call the Pet Emergency Response Unit, explaining they'd arrive quickly with the animal ambulance. They could bring Luna to me or another close facility for immediate care. But when Marcus tried, the dispatcher said they could no longer enter Elkwood Heights. The HOA had filed an official complaint, and under threat of legal action, the ambulance was hesitant to cross into the private community roads without explicit permission. Time was ticking. Luna's life hung in the balance. Panicked, Marcus raced on his bicycle through the dark streets, holding the wheezing cat in a carrier. By the time he reached my home, Luna's gums were pale, and she was close to respiratory failure. I acted swiftly, administering oxygen, placing in 4 catheter, and performing an emergency procedure to relieve fluid buildup around her lungs, likely from a sudden heart condition. Her heartbeat was faint, but after about 20 minutes of intense effort, we managed to stabilize her enough to transfer her to a larger veterinary center. Marcus was exhausted, shaking with relief, tears streaming down his face. He asked, why wouldn't they let the ambulance come? She almost died out there. I had no real answer except that the HOA, under Karen, had turned away the help that could have arrived in minutes. It was a terrifying brush with tragedy, and it enraged me. Animals were being endangered for no good reason. The cruelty and arbitrary power made me resolve that something had to change. I swore that if Karen was blocking medical services out of vanity or control, I would do everything in my power, everything, to stop her. The story of Luna's near-death spread like wildfire among neighbors. Many had pets they loved as family. It dawned on them that if an emergency struck, they too could be left helpless. The fear turned to anger directed at the HOA's policy, which was basically a one-woman show under Karen. A group of concerned residents organized a meeting at Mr. Davison's home, one of the few older folks unafraid of Karen. About 15 people gathered in his living room, discussing how to challenge the ambulance ban and demand reforms. Some proposed collecting signatures to hold a special HOA election to replace Karen. Others suggested bringing the matter before the county, arguing that the roads might not be truly private if the public relies on them. We also talked about publicizing the real victims, the animals. One neighbor, a savvy social media influencer named Daniela, volunteered to create a campaign showcasing local pets who nearly died due to delayed ambulance access. The plan was to intensify the national backlash that had already begun. Though I was determined, I advised everyone to brace for retaliation. Karen controlled a portion of the HOA board. She had used intimidation for years. But now that we had a potent moral argument, children's puppies, elderly cats, therapy animals at risk, perhaps we could rally enough support to unseat her. Once Daniela's social media campaign launched, it took off with astonishing speed. She shared heart-wrenching photos of Luna, her chest shaved where I'd performed the emergency tap, with the caption, "This cat nearly died because an HOA banned the pet ambulance from entering the neighborhood." Stories of other pets, like Milo the puppy who choked, or an elderly golden retriever who needed oxygen, flooded in. The hashtags #HOA Karen and #Let the Ambulance In started trending. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional outlets, and soon national newspapers ran articles about the community that outlawed pet ambulances. Animal welfare organizations like the ASPCA and PETA lambasted Elkwood Heights leadership, calling the policy inhumane and morally reprehensible. Celebrities retweeted the story, fueling a wave of online petitions demanding Karen's resignation. An entire wave of condemnation descended upon our once quiet suburb. Karen, blindsided by the scale of the backlash, tried to control the narrative. She posted a letter on the HOA website stating that commercial vehicles had always been disallowed and that pet owners are still free to seek medical help outside the neighborhood. But it sounded tone-deaf. The public raged. Is a cat supposed to drive itself to the hospital? A puppy in crisis can't wait for a 30-minute drive. Furious comments flooded the HOA's inbox. Amid the furor, Karen refused to budge, doubling down on the rules. She insisted that to alter them would open the floodgates for all sorts of nuisance vehicles, from food trucks to door-to-door sales vans. It became evident that she cared more about maintaining absolute authority than about the actual well-being of residents and their beloved pets. Meanwhile, the entire neighborhood was thrust into a national spotlight. Despite the swirling controversy, Karen seemed oblivious to my broader professional standing. She might have known I was a veterinarian, but not that I had an international reputation among animal rescue circles. Over the years, I had participated in high-profile emergency missions, treating animals injured by hurricanes, wildfires, and even rescued dogs from overseas conflict zones. I had been featured on specialized vet shows and contributed to widely respected scientific journals. I had never flaunted that reputation in Elkwood Heights. But as the crisis escalated, a well-known journalist from a national network, Monica Rendell, recognized my name and reached out for an interview. She said, "I've been following your career, Dr. Waters. This is shocking. I'd like to interview you to shed light on how these HOA policies are endangering animals." Though I'm typically humble about my accomplishments, I agreed it was time to lay everything on the table. If the public realized that a recognized expert in emergency veterinary surgery was being stifled by a petty HOA, the outrage might push local authorities to act. The interview aired on primetime television. Monica introduced me, highlighting my track record of saving animals in disaster zones. She showed clips of rescue missions, me operating on a dog pulled from hurricane debris, carefully bandaging a koala after a bushfire in Australia. Then she delved into the situation at Elkwood Heights, pressing me about the ambulance ban. I calmly explained the stakes, the near tragedies, and how Karen had personally threatened me with liens and fines to keep me from helping neighbors' pets. By the end of the segment, viewers were visibly emotional. The host concluded, "It is appalling that a community leader would block a critical service for vulnerable animals, especially when a renowned emergency surgeon is right there, ready to help." The social media explosion afterward was enormous. As the national spotlight sharpened, local officials felt compelled to investigate. The county attorneys received numerous complaints. Animal rights lawyers began examining the HOA's bylaws for potential breaches of state or local statutes. In some jurisdictions, an HOA cannot block legitimate emergency vehicles from entering. The question was, did a pet ambulance qualify as essential emergency service? A state representative introduced a bill clarifying that any licensed emergency service for animals must be treated similarly to paramedics for humans. If that passed, Karen's ban would be illegal. Meanwhile, the local district attorney's office explored whether the HOA had committed gross negligence by knowingly endangering animals that needed prompt care. It was unprecedented, but so was the entire situation. Among the evidence was Luna's brush with death, the ambulance's statements that they'd been threatened with lawsuits if they entered. At the same time, an anonymous HOA board member leaked internal emails showing Karen urging them to hold the line against unwanted medical vehicles, calling the national backlash overblown. The sheer cruelty in those messages, treating urgent veterinary care as some petty annoyance, fueled the public fury. Karen, cornered and humiliated, lashed out with ferocity. She announced an emergency HOA meeting to address the lies being spread. On a stormy Friday night, she convened the board at the clubhouse and summoned the entire neighborhood, presumably to lecture them. I attended, along with many outraged residents. Karen spoke first, her voice trembling with anger. She claimed the negative publicity was based on exaggerations and slander. She doubled down. Elkwood Heights has always had high standards. We will not let outside forces disrupt our peaceful environment. Any attempts to park a pet ambulance on our streets will be met with immediate fines and towing. At that point, multiple neighbors stood to challenge her. Mr. Davison demanded, "A cat nearly died because of your rules. How dare you call that an exaggeration?" Another neighbor tearfully recounted how her elderly dog had a seizure last week, and she didn't dare call an ambulance, fearing it wouldn't arrive. Karen insisted they should plan ahead by driving their animals to clinics themselves, or move somewhere else if they want that nonsense. Gasps filled the room. Her arrogance was laid bare. It was my turn. I rose and calmly stated that, from a professional standpoint, the HOA's position was not only unethical, but potentially unlawful. I also revealed that attorneys were investigating whether her ban violated local health and safety regulations. Karen snapped at me, "You'll regret meddling. This is my neighborhood, and I'll see you in court if I must." The tension hung in the air, thick as the thunder outside. Everyone sensed we were at a breaking point. Sometimes it takes a heartbreaking event to spur real change. The catalyst occurred a week after that fiery meeting. Barbara Sullivan, a resident who owned a gentle old Labrador named Toby, was out for an evening walk when Toby collapsed, panting, his tongue pale. It seemed like a sudden cardiac crisis. Barbara dialed the pet emergency response unit. The dispatcher reminded her they weren't allowed to enter the private roads of Elkwood Heights without risking legal trouble. Desperate, Barbara tried to carry Toby herself, but the dog was large. She scrambled, calling other neighbors, but precious minutes ticked by. She finally managed to flag down a friend with an SUV, but by the time Toby reached the nearest open clinic, he had died. The veterinarian suspected that if Toby had received oxygen and stabilization earlier, like from a dedicated ambulance, he might have survived. Barbara was inconsolable. She posted a tearful video on social media, condemning the HOA's ban as lethal. This tragic loss became the final straw. National headlines blared. Dog dies in community that banned ambulances for pets. Animal lovers across the country raged at Karen's heartlessness. The calls for her resignation swelled tenfold. The local government, hammered by public pressure, decided to step in. Within days of Toby's death, the county district attorney announced they were investigating whether Karen and the HOA board's policies constituted a violation of animal welfare laws. In many states, willful interference with necessary veterinary care can be considered cruelty or neglect if it leads to harm. Meanwhile, a wave of resignations hit the HOA board. Members distanced themselves from Karen, claiming she had bullied them into compliance. Freed from her grip, they leaked more emails in which Karen referred to pet ambulance calls as hysterical nonsense and stated, "If some animals die, it's not our problem. Our property values matter more." When these messages became public, the outrage soared beyond measure. Animal rights attorneys seized on these revelations, filing a civil lawsuit on behalf of the deceased Toby and other near victims, including Luna and Milo. The suit named Karen personally, as well as the HOA. The potential damages were massive. The media dubbed it a landmark case for animal emergency rights. Karen, for her part, made no apologies. She hired a high-priced lawyer, claiming her actions were within the scope of HOA enforcement. But her defiance only fueled the furor. Elkwood Heights itself was in turmoil. Residents held nightly protests at the entrance, demanding she resign. Some even threatened to withhold HOA dues if she remained in power. The final blow landed one fateful morning when uniformed county deputies arrived at Karen's immaculate two-story home. With them was an official from the district attorney's office, armed with documents. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Karen was being served with both a civil summons and a warrant related to possible criminal charges, interference with emergency services, and animal cruelty. While the latter charge was unusual, rarely is an HOA official indicted for such a thing. The county felt the severity of Toby's death justified it. Neighbors watched from their windows as the deputies knocked on Karen's door. She answered, pale but still defiant, demanding they leave. The lead deputy calmly explained that she was under arrest. Karen shrieked indignantly, but they handcuffed her on her pristine porch. Onlookers gaped. Some took cell phone videos. Others just stared in stunned silence. Simultaneously, official notices were posted on her door indicating potential civil forfeiture of certain assets pending the lawsuit's outcome. The charges included wrongdoing that could require paying significant damages, potentially forcing Karen to liquidate her property if found guilty. Suddenly, the woman who once lorded over everyone with threats of fines and liens faced losing everything herself. Karen's trial combined both criminal proceedings, animal cruelty, obstruction of emergency services, and civil lawsuits from Toby's owner and others. The courthouse overflowed with press and spectators. Animal rights groups picketed outside, holding images of Toby and signs like "Justice for our pets." The prosecution built a powerful case. They showed Karen's documented emails threatening the ambulance service. They presented the calls from frantic owners, turned away or forced to drive out of the neighborhood. They highlighted Toby's death, connecting it directly to the ban, arguing that Toby's life could have been saved. Veterinary experts testified, including me. I explained the critical importance of rapid response for certain conditions, pointing out that Toby's heart event was survivable if treated swiftly. I also recounted the intimidation I faced and the potential harm to other animals. Karen's defense tried to argue that the HOA rules were legitimate private regulations and that Toby's death might have been unavoidable. They claimed she was being scapegoated. But the jury was unmoved, especially after hearing Karen's recorded statements mocking hysterical pet owners. After a tense deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including a form of animal cruelty through willful obstruction of life-saving care. Additionally, she was found liable for wrongful death of Toby in the civil suit. The judge was unsparing in the sentencing, denouncing her callous disregard for living creatures and the neighbors she was supposed to serve. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge pronounced sentencing. Karen would serve a prison term, several years for the most severe charges, and pay hefty financial penalties to Toby's owner and others impacted by her ambulance ban. Beyond that, the civil court authorized property forfeiture if necessary to cover restitution, meaning her beloved house in Elkwood Heights, once her seat of power, was subject to immediate seizure. She stood, trembling, as bailiffs led her away. Reporters snapped photos, capturing her final moment of arrogance, giving way to abject humiliation. The once unassailable HOA president, who terrorized neighbors over trash bins and wind chimes, was now the one losing everything. With Karen in custody, the The HOA swiftly voted to remove her from presidency and began the process of repealing the hated ambulance ban. The new board apologized to the community, emphasizing that they would adopt humane policies and welcome a properly regulated veterinary ambulance service. A sense of relief washed over Elkwood Heights. Residents could now care for their pets without fear. No more petty fines, no more intimidation. Many felt sorrow that Toby's life was the price for exposing Karen's malice, but at least future tragedies could be prevented. In the weeks following Karen's conviction, Elkwood Heights underwent a peaceful transformation. Neighborhood kids walked their dogs freely. Pet ambulances occasionally entered the community, no sirens unless absolutely necessary, and families felt reassured knowing help was close by. My part-time emergency clinic in the garage, finally approved by the new board, became a welcoming space for after-hours urgent care. Thanks to improved policies, animals who fell ill or were injured had immediate access to oxygen for fluids or minor surgeries, often bridging the gap until a full-service hospital could take over. The community grew closer, forging a shared sense of pride in having overcome a tyrant. Toby's memory endured, spurring many residents to volunteer or donate to animal welfare organizations. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Karen set a precedent. Legal analysts called it a landmark moment for recognizing that certain essential animal services are akin to human emergency services, and HOAs can't arbitrarily block them without risking severe penalties. Some states even introduced legislation to clarify these protections. As for me, I carried on with my calling, content that Elkwood Heights was now a place where animals could thrive without bureaucratic cruelty. Whenever I stepped onto my porch, I no longer feared a folded note threatening fines for unauthorized medical activity. Instead, neighbors would greet me with waves, thanking me for standing up for them and their pets. We had turned a nightmare into a triumphant story of compassion and justice. Karen, stripped of her power and property, languished in prison. She never admitted wrongdoing, blaming liberal media spin and meddling outsiders. But the courts had spoken, and the public had reached its verdict long before the gavel fell. Her downfall became a cautionary tale about the perils of absolute control, about how an unfeeling obsession with trivial rules can overshadow basic morality. Elkwood Heights flourished in her absence. Fines dropped, neighbors formed real bonds, and the local rescue ambulance unit integrated smoothly. Families found solace knowing they could rely on swift help if their pets were in danger. Children frolicked with wagging puppies, seniors strolled peacefully with old dogs, and cats roamed the yard without fear. The burdensome tension that once defined the neighborhood lifted into fresh air. From time to time, national journalists revisited the story for updates, praising the community for turning tragedy into meaningful change. Each time, it reminded me that, ultimately, empathy and cooperation prevail over cruelty and bureaucracy. Elkwood Heights, once overshadowed by a tyrannical Karen, was now a shining example of how people and their beloved pets deserve safe, nurturing spaces to call home.